So I want to introduce to you Dr. Ronald Mincy, who really needs no introduction. He is a giant in the well, I don't mean high, I don't mean height-wise, but he is a giant in the field of research around fragile families and working with low-income families and working with fathers. It is a privilege and an honor to have him here with us in Puerto Rico. Dr. Ronald Mincy is the Maurice V. Russell Professor of Social Work Policy and Social Work Practices, teaching social welfare policy programs, evaluation, economics, policy analysis for advanced methods, as it really focuses in on the Center on Research for Fathers, Children, and Well-Being. He is also the co-principal investigator of something called the Fragile Families and Child Well-Being Study, a faculty member of Columbia Population Research Center. And really, it was a lot of the work that Dr. Mincy did many years ago that really helped us all to understand the important role that fathers play and the incredible role that they play in families. And we are delighted to have Dr. Mincy here in Puerto Rico with us. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ronald Mincy.
Joyce, thank you very much. I'm so thankful to be here. I want to thank FFCA for the invitation and the maestro for inviting me back. This is my second visit to your conference in Puerto Rico. Today's my birthday, my 63rd birthday. I don't look as good as her, but my wife and I, Dr. Florence, who's sitting in the audience, we had the pleasure of spending the weekend in your beautiful city, roaming around the hills, and it's just a wonderful time. So I want to be brief to help us make sure our other speakers have an opportunity. I want to talk to you briefly from my book called Failing Our Fathers, which was released in February, and is a book that I would hope will help change some of the dialogue, some of the narrative that we have, especially about non-resident fathers. I focus in this book on what I call economically vulnerable non-resident fathers. And what I'm trying to do really is to recharacterize the way we think about the circumstances of fathers and families and how we can help them be more engaged in the lives of their children in order to improve the well-being of children over time. So if you just, James, get to the first slide, about 4 slides into the table, bam, good, stop. So my thought is that if the 1980s were the decade of the deadbeat dad and the 1990s the decade of the dead broke dad, the 2020s should be a decade in which we understand that there's a broad swath of men who are of childbearing age who are struggling economically, and as a result, this is contributing to declines in marriage rates, increases in the number of children who are born to single mothers who live without their fathers. And this is a much more general problem than the challenge of Black and Latino families that we've talked about for decades. So one of the things, this chart shows, I can't see it down there, but I can see it here. If you look at the middle line in this chart, maybe I'll take a risk. If you look in one of the things I did was I fractured my foot while fooling around the other day, so I want to be careful. But if you look at the middle line in this chart, where essentially in 1974, we see an increase in, this chart shows the average hourly earnings of men from 1950 to about 2010. And if you look in the middle line, what it shows is that the dark lines in here show periods of economic recessions, and the white spaces show essentially periods of economic recovery. And what we see in this chart is that in the 1950s, between 1959 and about 1974, the average hourly earnings of men were growing quite substantially. But since then, since 1974, basically, the average hourly earnings of most men in the United States have not budged. That is to say, the earnings of men have been flat since I graduated from college many years ago. And if the earnings of the average man haven't grown since 1974, then the earnings of less educated men have in fact been falling. And so this is the broad context in which we've been trying to raise families, form families, and have children in the United States for basically all of my adult life. I got married I was pleasure being married when I was 22 years old. And for the past 40 years, Floan and I will celebrate our 40th anniversary in September. The average hourly earnings of most men have not budged. And as a result, we have increasing fractions of children who are born to unmarried parents. One of the most important predictors of marriage rates for individual couples is the earnings of men. Okay? When couples are together, the man's earnings are a more important determinant of whether or not that couple will get married than her earnings or anything else. I had the privilege, though Flona paid my way through college and supported us as a result of that, I have never been unemployed. And that's a rare experience for adult men, particularly adult men of color. I did, though, as a graduate student, I had her to support my family. That was not a good feeling. And as a consequence, most men who are in the position of not being able to be the primary breadwinners in our family are not in a good position. And as a result, an increasing fraction of men have had that experience since I was a kid in 1974. So for this reason, what we have is a huge increase in the number of men, first of all, who have children outside of marriage, and in the diversity of those men. So in the 1980s and 1990s, sociologists like William Julius Wilson and Elijah Anderson established these ideas of the inner city black and Latino men who are unable to support their families. And that idea has sort of permeated our understanding of fathers and families in the United States. But more recently, some estimates that are based upon new data sets show that there are about 9% of all adult men between 15 and 44 years old are non-resident fathers. This is 9% of all men who make up to $40,000 a year. And of those men, they are unable to support themselves and their children and families simultaneously. Some other data sets show that if we estimate, there are about 7.5 million non-resident fathers in the United States, and about 5.3 of them, according to some data, earn no more than $40,000 a year. Another data set estimates that there are 9.5 million non-resident fathers, but only 40% of them have child support orders. And the reason why $40,000 is important is because of this diagram. So James, can you just fast forward to the next table quickly? A little more, 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 a little more. Bam. Serving programs that are working with fathers who earn only a quarter of what this first diagram shows. If a guy earns 4 times as much money and works full-time and full year, pays his bills and pays his child support in full, which he should do, he is $6,000 below the poverty level at one child, and nearly $8,000 if he earns if he has 2 children. Now, suppose he makes $30,000 a year. Make the same calculation. Such a father is $2,000 below the poverty level if he has 1 child, and about nearly $4,000 below the poverty level if he has 2 children. Advance finally to suppose he earns $40,000 a year. $40,000 is not bad money, okay? However, if he pays his child support in full, he is $3,000 below the poverty level if he has 1 child, and only $800 above the poverty level if he has 2 children. So over the years, we have gotten increasing, and this is an important thing. Since 1974, 2 things have occurred. The average hourly earnings of men have gone down, but our commitment to collecting child support has gone up. We've done a whole variety of things to make child support the expectation, which is a good thing, to enable fathers to require fathers to support their kids, but their ability to support their kids has declined, and we've done very little to help them get to the place that they need to go. The final two things I want to say is this, and we need to do a whole variety of things about that, but not only for the lowest income men, not only for men who have children on TANF, not only for men who are formerly incarcerated, but again, there are lots of men who are in the middle of the income distribution who, because their earnings are low, their marriage rates are low, because our attitudes about marriage and family have changed, we've become much more tolerant of other types of family forms. We have an increasing number of kids who, young people who are having children today. 50% of all children in the United States born to women under 30 are born to an unmarried mother. Hear that. 50% of all children in the United States born to women under 30 years old are born to an unmarried mother. That means that the modal pattern of family formation in the United States is relationship, dating, cohabitation. It is common for people to live together and have children, but when they break up, you have a single mom. And as a result of that, we have to move away from the idea of criminalizing non-marital births and instead help both the mother and the father improve themselves educationally, improve themselves in terms of their employment and earnings so that both of them can support their children. I'm getting to my final two questions. The other thing that we studied in these data, we did lots of data analysis, but we also talked to men about what their experience was raising their kids, and especially about this situation of their stagnant earnings. Many of them grew up in a period in which their fathers saw their earnings increase over time, and they thought their earnings would increase over time as well. And they have been roundly disappointed for several decades. And as a result, many men, and this is long before the recession of 2007, 2009. That is to say, this has been going on since 1974. And when you talk to men about their experience, what they say is, this is my fault. So we interviewed men who were high school dropouts, high school graduates, some who had college, and some who had graduated from college. And we would talk to men about what's your experience been like, and they said, because I failed to get all the education I needed, my earnings have not grown as rapidly as they might have otherwise, and I was more vulnerable to the recession of 2007, 2009 than I would have been otherwise. And you talk to the high school dropout, that's what he said. You turn the page, and you talk to the high school graduate, and that's what he said. And you turn the page, and you talk to the guy who had some college, and he said the same thing. In other words, no matter what their level of education, they blame themselves. We call this educational regret. They blame themselves for failing to get enough schooling and as a result being vulnerable to the long-term negative declining trend in their earnings, and also for the fact that the recession hurt them. Now, it can't be that all of them were right? It can't be that the guy who dropped out didn't get enough school and the guy who graduated didn't get enough school and the guy who got some college. In other words, this is a long-term trend that was true of all men. The only men who saw themselves increase their earnings over this period were men who went to graduate school. In other words, if you had a master's degree or above, you saw your earnings rise. But if you were a high school college graduate, if you were a had some college, all other men saw their earnings decline by at least 10%, and those who graduated from college saw their earnings rise by only 3%. So there's been a general decline in earnings for most of the fathers of children these days. It has reduced marriage rates, increased non-marital birth rates, increased non-marital fatherhood, and yet we have, as appropriately, demanded that men support their children, but we've done very little to enable them to do so. But the other thing they said as a consequence is that I'm going to make sure that my failure to get more schooling and as a result make higher earnings does not happen to my kids. I'm going to make sure that my kids get the schooling that I failed to get. So I want to just end by talking about two fathers in particular and how they process this thing. This is a father. His name was Edward. He was married. He has one set of children outside of marriage and another set of children with whom he's married. And he said the following: "My children's education, that's what my savings will be most likely be for. everything, I'm doing what I want to do for me as well, but everything that I do is really revolved around how it's going to benefit my children later on. I haven't always been in a position to do all the things that I wanted to do or needed to do for them because of, drug abuse history and the accident when I lost the vision in my left eye and subsequently had to have it removed. Let me back up. When we talk to these men, one of the things that stood out to me is that this could be my brother, your cousin, etc. This is a man who had a full-time, full-year job until he was involved in an accident where he lost his eye. And as a consequence of losing his eye, now, by the way, I am a cancer survivor for 6 years, and I've replaced both my knees, and I've had knee surgery, and I've rotator cuff surgery. So I've been banged up, okay? However, I have had health insurance. And as a consequence, when I got cancer, I went to the best surgeon for sarcoma cancer in the world. Okay, I went to places that had knee surgery and hooked me up. I had therapy to get me rolling, etc., etc. But most men, not until this year, don't have all of that. When this gentleman lost his eye, he didn't have access to health insurance. He didn't have. One of the things I had to learn after I got cancer was not only how to heal physically, but how to heal myself emotionally. And I had to go to a therapist and learn how to rework myself and eat properly and not be such a workaholic, etc., etc. This guy didn't have access to that. And as a result, when he lost his eye, he got depressed. He began to use drugs. And as a consequence, his physical accident resulted in an emotional accident or challenges, resulted in substance abuse. He lost his job. He was gone. Trust me, this can happen to any of us, right? And what shocked me about the experience of so many of these men was, there but for the grace of God go I, right? And so for too many people, men in particular, the challenges that they normally experience in life exit them from the pathway of work and earnings and family, and we do very little to help them recover. However, these guys were determined. They said, I'm going to make sure that my failure to get enough schooling so that I support my family doesn't hurt my kids. And then we began to look at the data to see, well, how often do these guys follow through on this promise? How involved in their education are they really, and what difference would it make? And I want to close with this. So again, this is from my book called Failing Our Fathers. I urge you to get this. Many of you are writing